A cosmological argument relies on the idea of causation, that is, cause and effect. Everything has a cause, noted Aquinas. The universe is a thing, and therefore the universe should have a cause. All three of these arguments rely on practically the same logic, that is, every effect in the universe has a cause, and without some kind of Aristotelian unmoved mover, you'd end up with an infinite regress, this idea of causation just going back and back and back forever, and there'd be no reason for it to have got started at all, no reason for the universe to exist. But hang on a second. God surely is also a thing. So if everything has a cause, then what caused God? Well, this is where the Kalam Cosmological argument comes in. It makes one small adjustment to the original premises. Instead of saying that everything has a cause, it says that everything that begins to exist has a cause. And God has always existed, he never began, and therefore is exempt from this infinite regress. And hey presto, problem solved, right? Well, no, and let me tell you why. Firstly, you may have noticed that I referred to this first mover just then as God, as he. But there's a world of difference between proving the existence of some kind of arbitrary first mover and proving the existence of a God, and especially your particular God. Even if the Kalam cosmological argument was sound, which I hope to prove to you that it's not, it still wouldn't prove any particular God.
The Kalam cosmological argument thus gives us powerful grounds for believing in the existence of a beginningless, uncaused, timeless, spaceless, changeless, immaterial, enormously powerful, personal creator of the universe. And that is what everybody means by God.
Now, Frank Turek, who we've encountered before on this channel, has had this contention put to him on more than one occasion, and he attempts to get around it by claiming that whatever it was that caused the universe had to be some kind of personal being, because it had to make a choice in creating the universe. Here's a clip from one of his videos called From the Kalam to the Biblical God.
And then also personal. Why does the being need to be personal? Because in order to make a choice, which is what you have to do in order to go from a state of nothingness to a state of creation, you have to be a person.
But Turek and others like him fail to consider the fact that consciousness is not always needed as a driving force behind something happening. I mean, does a leaf choose to fall off of a tree?
Finally, Ghazali argued that this first uncaused cause must be a personal being. It's the only way to explain how an eternal cause can produce an effect with a beginning like the universe. Here's the problem. If a cause is sufficient to produce its effect, then once the cause is there, the effect must be there as well. Otherwise, the cause wasn't really sufficient. If the cause is sufficient for its effect, then given the existence of the cause, the effect must exist as well. So, for example, the cause of water's freezing is the temperatures being below 0 degrees Celsius. So if the temperature were below 0 degrees from eternity, any water that was around would be frozen from eternity. It would be impossible for the water just to begin to freeze a finite time ago. Now, the cause of the universe is permanently there, since it's timeless, as we've seen. So why isn't the universe permanently there as well? Why did the universe come into being only 14 billion years ago? Why isn't the universe as permanent as its cause? Ghazali maintained that the answer to this problem is that the first cause must be a personal being endowed with freedom of the will. His creating the universe is a free act which is independent of any prior determining conditions.
But even if you could prove that there was some kind of consciousness behind the universe, Turek still makes no link as to why this would need to be a personal God. I mean, who's to say this God would still be around? Who's to say that it cares about humans or intervenes in worldly affairs? And for that matter, who's to say that it would be one God? Why not some kind of polytheistic council?
Yes, why not several creators? Why not polytheism rather than one creator? I would appeal to Occam's razor. Occam's razor is an explanatory principle which says, do not multiply causes beyond necessity. That is to say, you are justified only in inferring those causes which are necessary to explain the effect, and you would be unjustified to infer any more than that. And in this case, one creator is sufficient to explain the effect and is necessary to explain the effect, and therefore Occam's razor will simply shave away any other sorts of creators.
And who's to say that it's not some kind of evil god with evil intentions?
Well, it's quite right that arguments like the cosmological argument or the teleological or design argument, which we haven't talked about, don't get you the moral properties of the creator and designer of the universe. But the moral argument and the ontological argument do. Both of those lead to a being which is the moral paradigm and source of all moral value and moral obligation. And so those arguments complement the cosmological and teleological arguments by telling us something about the moral properties of the creator and designer of the universe.
The list is unending. This argument offers absolutely no specificities on the nature of this prime mover. And look, this whole argument exists for the sake of it being impossible for there to be an infinite regress of causation. But is that really an impossibility?
Now, the series of past events, Ghazali observes, has been formed by adding one event after another. The series of events in the past is like a sequence of dominoes falling one after another until the last domino today is finally reached. But, he argues, no series which is formed by adding one member after another can be actually infinite. Now, I think this is easy to see in the case of trying to count to infinity. No matter how high you count, there is always an infinity of numbers left to count. And therefore, no one can count to infinity. And infinity will simply be a limit to the series of numbers he counts. But if you cannot count to infinity, how can you count down from infinity? This would be like someone's claiming to have counted down all of the negative numbers ending at 0. And that seems crazy. For before he could count 0, he would have to count -1. But before he could count -1, he would have to count -2. And so on, back to infinity. Before any number could be counted, an infinity of numbers would already have to have been counted first. So you just get driven back and back and back into the past so that no number could ever be counted. But then the final domino would never fall if an infinite number of dominoes had to fall first. So today could never be reached. But obviously here we are. So this shows that the series of past events must be finite and have had a beginning.
I mean, to be sure, our observable universe did have a beginning. The Big Bang did happen. I mean, you can actually see it with the right kind of telescope. In fact, if you want to see a video on some proofs for the Big Bang, do let me know in the comments. It's been something that I've been considering doing for a while, so if you want to see that, do let me know. Now, theists often point to the Big Bang and say, well look, here's the beginning of everything in existence. There must have been some kind of cause behind it. But hold on, because the Big Bang has never claimed to be the beginning of everything. Rather, it's only ever claimed to be the beginning of everything that we know of. Perhaps there were universes before ours. Perhaps the death of one universe is the Big Bang of the next, and this could be some kind of infinite chain.
Singularity theorems that were developed by Stephen Hawking and Roger Penrose pretty much put the kibosh on these oscillating models, because what it showed was that in a universe that is contracting down like this, a singularity is inevitable. You can't really escape the singularity. Moreover, even if you could, entropy is conserved from cycle to cycle, which has the effect of making each cycle longer and larger than the previous cycle, so that you still couldn't have an infinite past. You would still have a beginning prior to the smallest cycle. Joseph Silk, who is an astronomer, in his book called The Big Bang, says that based on current entropy levels in the universe, it couldn't have gone through more than about 100 previous oscillations.
Perhaps there's a multiverse, and not even a multiverse of separate entities, but maybe one large, infinitely large fabric in which there are sort of localized areas of activity, one of which is our observable universe, which did have its own beginning.
There are theories called multiverse theories, which would suggest that our universe is just a tiny fraction of a much wider space-time reality. And the arguments that I give in the Kalam Cosmological argument for the second premise that the universe began to exist is fully in conversation with these sorts of theories. On the one hand, there are the philosophical arguments against the possibility of an infinite regress. And those philosophical arguments, being metaphysical in nature, are not limited to this universe. It would apply to any wider sort of reality that this universe might be encompassed by, and would show that there cannot be an infinite regress of events, that you have to get back to an absolutely first cause, an uncaused cause of the universe. So the philosophical arguments are not in any way affected by the speculation that there might be a multiverse of which our universe is a part. Now, to address the question on a purely scientific level, the difficulty here is not only that there's no evidence for the existence of such wider parallel universes or encompassing mother universes, but rather that we have good reasons to think that such a multiverse does not exist, or at least cannot be extended into the infinite past. So long as the multiverse obeys what is called the Borg-Guth-Vilenkin theorem, which says that any universe which is in a state of cosmic expansion on average throughout its history, then even the multiverse itself has only a finite past and cannot be infinite. And it's for that reason that Vilenkin, Borg, and Guth developed this theory against past eternal inflationary models of the universe, which featured a multiverse of worlds, which are bubbles of true vacuum in an expanding ocean of false vacuum. And they showed that this inflationary multiverse cannot be infinite in the past, but must itself have a beginning.
There's simply no way for us to know. Aquinas, Craig, and Turek alike assume some kind of singular grand beginning to not only our universe, but anything that does, will, and can exist. And there's simply no proof to back this up. There's a lot that we don't know about the laws of physics. There's probably a lot that we can't know about the laws of physics. I mean, let's not forget that we are constrained to one single universe. There's no way for us to compare it with any others. We can test things within the universe because we can make control variables when we have more than one example of the thing that we're trying to test. But we shouldn't be so naive to assume that everything that applies to things within the universe also applies to the universe itself. To do so is to commit the fallacy of composition, and this is one of Bertrand Russell's prime objections to the Kalam cosmological argument. Here's an example of the logic. No atoms are alive, therefore nothing made of atoms is alive. You can see the problem here. Now, this isn't to say that this logic doesn't work sometimes. There's a good example from carneades.org, I'll link in the description, of a brick wall. Okay, suppose we had a brick wall of which all of the bricks were red. Does that mean that the wall itself is red? Well, yes, of course it does. But suppose we said that every brick was small. Does that mean that the wall itself was small? Well, no. Just because the bricks are small doesn't mean the wall itself is small. Just because everything within the universe has a cause doesn't mean the universe itself has a cause.
I've heard some internet skeptics respond to this third point by saying it commits the fallacy of composition. The fallacy of composition. Now, what's that? Well, the fallacy of composition involves inferring that because every part of a thing has a certain property, therefore the whole thing has that property. This third point that I'm making, that common experience and scientific evidence support the truth of premise one, doesn't reason by composition. It doesn't infer because every part of the universe has a cause, therefore the whole universe has a cause. It doesn't even refer to parts of the universe. Rather, this third point is a case of what's called inductive reasoning, which underlies all of science. One infers from a random sample of items some property which is shared by items of that sort. And in this case, the sort in question is things that begin to exist. When we look at things that begin to exist, scientific evidence and common experience is that they always have causes. So the generalization, whatever begins to exist has a cause of its beginning, is a very powerful inductive inference. You infer this general truth based upon a random sample of typical cases. So this objection is, I think, just based on a confusion between inductive reasoning, which is sound reasoning, and reasoning by composition, which is fallacious reasoning.
But it's important to recognize here that we're not saying that there was definitely no cause behind the universe, or if there was, that it definitely wasn't a god. Okay, it's the theist that's making an active claim, and we're simply trying to rebut it. This series, this Arguments for God series, is a series of rebuttals, not a series of arguments, okay, because the burden of proof does not lie with the atheist. But with that out of the way, let's conclude with a summary of the Kalam Cosmological argument. So here goes. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. I believe that there was a beginning, not only to everything within the observable universe, but to that universe itself and everything that does, can, and will ever exist. Therefore, there must have been some kind of prime mover, and that prime mover was obviously the god of the religion in which I happen to have been brought up. Checkmate, atheists.